Reasons that you will use for your proofs are the congruent complement theorem. I'm not going to have you worry too much about same angle versus congruent angles, but the words are, if two angles are complementary to the same angle, then, and I want to remind you that complementary means they add to 90. So if two angles are complementary to the same angle, well, let's pretend for a minute that that angle has a measurement of 40 degrees. So I have two angles that are both complementary to that angle. Do you agree that in order to be complementary to that angle, both of those two angles would have to be 50 degrees, because that way they would add up to 90. So our conclusion, noticing that both of these are 50 degrees, is that they are congruent. And so we have the statement, 1 is complementary to 2, 2 is complementary to 3. Our conclusion would be that since they're both complementary to 2, 1 and 3 are both congruent as well, are congruent to each other. The congruent complement theorem with congruent angles also ends up with them being congruent. Instead of having them being complementary to each other, they're both complementary to angles that we know are congruent. So 3 and 4 are congruent to 1 and 2, but 1 and 2 are the same size. So our conclusion is still going to be angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. You are allowed to use the congruent complement theorem as a reason in your proofs. The congruent supplement theorem is also similar. The congruent supplement theorem is if two angles are supplementary to the same angle, then they are congruent. And so you're allowed to use that in your proof. You're going to want, if you're using this theorem, you're going to want to be given that we have two angles that are supplementary to the same angle. So these are both supplementary to angle 2, which means we can conclude that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. We can also use congruent supplements when we are supplementary to congruent angles. So 1 is supplementary to 3, and 2 is supplementary to 4, but 2 and 3 are the same size, so that means that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. You can use the congruent supplement theorem as a reason in your proof. You're going to need to know, if you're going to use it, that you have two angles that are supplementary to something that's the same size. The last two reasons are transitive and substitution. Transitive is if two angles or segments are congruent to the same angle or segment. So this is not complementary or supplementary, this is congruent. In order to use this theorem, your if has to involve two sets of congruences, or a set of two congruences, and our conclusion is going to be they are congruent. So in this example, I know that 1 is congruent to 2, I know that 2 is congruent to 3, so my conclusion is that 1 has to be congruent to 3. 1 and 2 are the same size, 2 and 3 are the same size, so 1 and 3 are the same size as well. Substitution and transitive sometimes get confused for each other. Substitution means if two quantities are equal, then they can be substituted for each other. And I want you to think about substitute teachers. When you do a substitution, you're doing a replacement. So they can be replaced, or they can replace each other in a math equation. So here I have a math equation, and I have a statement that AB is congruent to XY, which means that I can replace AB with XY since they are the same. They're a substitution. So I can rewrite this math statement as XY plus BC equals AC. So in order to use substitution, you need to be given a math equation of some kind and that you have some quantities that are equal to each other. And then you can make a conclusion that you can substitute for them. All right. So these are all one-step statement reason proofs. I'm going to go through the first two, and I'll also post my work for the others online so you can check those. But the way they work with a statement reason, it's always going to be a detachment, a law of detachment thing. So my first statement is I'm using this diagram and I'm looking at angle 1 and angle 2 in the diagram. What I notice as I'm looking at the diagram is that angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles. So I go through my proofs and my reasons and I say, oh, I'm looking for something that starts with angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles. So if two angles are vertical angles, would be the first part of my statement. The next line is going to be detachment, that would be the then part of that statement. So if two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. And so that's why we have those congruents there. The reason for that is the vertical angle theorem, which is on our list of possible reasons. Okay. This next one says 8 and 9 are right angles. So I'm given that these two angles are right angles. That was my gift. Then I have a theorem that says if two angles are right angles, then they are congruent. So I would write angle 8 is congruent to angle 9. And the reason for that is the right angle congruence theorem. So remember, as you're doing these, it's law of detachment. You have the if part and you're trying to get to the then part. All right, good luck. Thank you.